Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I am Geoff Mosher, and joining me to break down this Week 6 Eagles game against the Cleveland Browns is Greg Cosell. Adam Caplan will be back with us next week. So, Greg, the Eagles are 2-2, coming out of the bye, trying to move past a 33-16 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa last time they were on the field. And the Browns are 1-4, riding a three-game losing streak, including last Sunday's 34-13 road loss to the Commanders. I think this is a really interesting illustration, Greg, of how year to year, week to week, the NFL can be, because both the Eagles and the Browns were playoff teams last year that won double-digit games. And if you look up and down the rosters of both teams, you see some pretty talented players there. I'm a strong believer, Greg, that if you're a team that has a certain amount of talent and things aren't going well, and you can say that about the Eagles and even more so about the Browns, sometimes you're not as bad as it looks, right? There are other teams, I'll throw Carolina out there, maybe Las Vegas, where you say the talent's just not there right now. So I wonder with these two teams, specifically Cleveland, we'll get into them as well here, if it's just that they've got to make some subtle minor changes, get some better play out of certain individuals, and you'll start to see a difference.
And that's possible. I mean, look, we'll discuss Cleveland in detail, and obviously they've not been very good for a number of reasons. But you just look at their division. I mean, theoretically, you put a couple of wins together and you're right back in it. Who thought that the Bengals would be 1-4? Even
Right.
the Steelers have now lost two in a row. They're 3-2. And even Baltimore playing extremely well right now, but they're only 3-2. So in a sense, this is a big game for the Browns, just as it is for the Eagles. And obviously, we're going to discuss the Eagles, but they needed the bye week maybe to reassess some things, try to figure things out. I'm sure there'll be some tweaks somewhere along the line. There always are. Teams tend to self-scout during the bye week. Coaches anyway. I know the players aren't necessarily in the building for the whole bye week, but that's what coaches do. They self-scout. They try to figure out what works, what doesn't work, where they can improve. Are there certain individuals maybe that need to play better or that need more time, less time, whatever it may be. But
Yeah.
that's what the bye week does, and I'm sure that's what the Eagles did. I'm sure there'll be some personnel changes.
Yep. Yep. The interesting thing about this matchup to me, Greg, that really, sort of big picture that stands out is that the Eagles had a very disappointing end of the year last year, and they made a lot of changes. They're off to a disappointing start by their standards. You look at the Browns, they had a very good finish to the year last year,
Yes.
thanks to Joe Flacco stepping in as the backup quarterback. If you look at their offseason, Greg, you would say they were more net positive than negative because they bring in Jerry Jeudy. They really didn't lose anybody of major significance to their starting roster, other than, of course, Joe Flacco. And obviously, quarterback play and injuries have hurt them. But that just goes to show you the volatile nature of how teams are. You think you're going to be one thing, you think you've made your corrections either by signing a lot of guys or just by bringing back guys from a
Right.
talented team, and here you are, struggling 4 weeks into the year.
Well, I'm sure the assumption was that with a full off season, full training camp, that Deshaun Watson would return to being somewhat the player that he was with the Houston Texans.
Right.
If not at that level, certainly a large enough percentage to that level that he'd be a quality NFL starter. And just being honest, he has not played that way at all. And in fact, and again, this is what the tape says, he has played below the level of a starting NFL quarterback. And I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, and I don't get into the money situation. I don't get into what the owner might be saying or might not be saying behind closed doors. Maybe that's the reason. Who knows? But the point is, they do have another quarterback on their roster who's started in this league many, many games and performed at times at a high level. You just wonder why that change wouldn't be made, because the thing is, Geoff, is the players know. It's
Right.
not it's not what we think or what other media people think or what's discussed on social media. That's not relevant. The players know.
Right. Right. Well, the Eagles, to be fair to the Browns, have been a get right team for two quarterbacks already in 4 weeks. We saw Kirk Cousins shake off a bad
Right.
opener and have a nice game against the Eagles, and we saw Baker Mayfield have a rough game against the Broncos and come back and light up the Eagles. So we'll see. Maybe. I mean, you and I have covered this game for a while. I'm sure that Kevin Stefanski, the Browns head coach, is thinking the exact same thing you are about Jameis Winston just sitting there, but he's probably going to hold out until he really feels that the bottom is there. And look, by the end of the half of Sunday, we'll see what happens. Maybe that's the case. Deshaun Watson, we're not going to talk about on the injury report, Greg, because he's not injured, but he's coming back
Right.
from an injury. And I wanted to start with you on that before we get into the injuries. I don't know in your tape watching if you're able to tell this, but you watch so much tape, you study quarterbacks. He is coming off a shoulder surgery and he has been banged up. Is there anything you ever decipher in tape study where you know when a quarterback is coming off either an Achilles or a shoulder or an elbow that they don't look right, like comfortable throwing the ball? And is that anything that you can see with Deshaun Watson, or is it something else that you think going on?
I don't think that's his issue. If you're talking physically, no, I
Right.
don't think that's his issue. Again, I can't speak to how he feels. Maybe he feels differently throwing a football. That I can't speak to. But
Mm-hmm.
watching him throw it and make throws, no, there's nothing physically that I look at and say, oh, something's not right. There's other factors and other issues which we can get into, but it's not a function of how he delivers a football.
Okay, we will get into that when we go through the offense versus defense. Let's talk about injuries because this is going to be a really short list for the Eagles and then a really longer list for the Browns. So we'll go with the Eagles. Guess what? Nobody's injured.
That's good.
I can't even give it. Not only I don't even. I'm not even being facetious here. On their Friday injury report, there was not one single player. I'll call it the 53 man, but as we talk about this, it's really 52 man right now because they have an open spot. Not one single player carried an injury designation, and everybody who was on the report practiced in full on Friday. So that means AJ Brown will play his first game since the season opener. It means
Right.
Lane Johnson is back at right tackle. It means Devontae Smith is back from the concussion. And even Nakobe Dean, who sort of mysteriously popped up, I believe, on Wednesday or Thursday as a limited participant with an ankle, is good to go and will play. So that's the one thing if you're the Eagles that in your control that you're really happy about coming out of the bye week is that if you're going to make changes, if you want to get better, you have your full strength of staff to be able to do that.
No, that's really good for them coming into this game. Um, obviously it's a huge game for them, so it's good. I'm glad
Mm-hmm.
to see Lane Johnson's good to go. I think he's a really important piece to their offense.
Yes, definitely. Their win-loss record without him is jar. I mean, it can't all be on one guy, but it is very interesting to see the disparity of their win-loss record when he plays and when he doesn't play. All right, Greg, the only question that you have is the Eagles released Devin White earlier in the week. That clearly was not a signing that worked out for them.
No,
This is now the second year in a row where they thought in their minds in the offseason. I'm going back to Terrell Edmonds from 2 years ago at safety, where they took a player from a different team and a different scheme. And it just, by the end of camp, you could tell it was not working out the way they wanted it to. When they signed Devin White, I believe we had you on.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
talked
had you
about it.
recap the free and you. It's not that you question the signing, but you did talk about the fact that his last year in Tampa Bay, his tape was not nearly as good as the first year or two.
Sure.
What do you recall seeing in Tampa Bay that you think, knowing Vic Fangio's defense, maybe it didn't work right for him there?
I would say this. I would say that the best part, and I'm sure the Eagles knew this, but maybe they thought they could resurrect him. I would say the best part of his game, certainly in the last year or so, was his ability to blitz. He was not very good in coverage. And if you know anything about the Vic Fangio defense, you know that he's not a high percentage blitzer. And his linebackers in coverage are really, really important. I've had conversations with coaches in the Fangio tree, and they
Mm-hmm.
talk about how important linebackers are in terms of getting the right depth, in terms of getting to the right landmark, in terms of reading routes and understanding splits of routes. Because at its core, the Vic Fangio defense is a zone-based defense. Now, he plays more man than people might think, but at its core, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not Devin White's strength. It never was. So my guess is they kind of recognized that early on, Geoff, because they
Yep.
kind of knew. I mean, they obviously released him this week. You and I both know that had been in the works for quite a while. They didn't wake up this week and say, "Okay, let's do it."
Right.
It had been in the works for quite a while.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to talk. We have said on the pod as soon as they signed Oren Burks, a veteran, as a sixth inside linebacker, on a team that doesn't even play more than two at a time. Usually that
Right,
was the
right.
clue that he was not going to play. We'll talk about whether or not there's some linebacker rotations potentially in store when we get to the defensive matchup. I want to ask you though, specifically to address, because I've tried to do this on our platform. So has Adam. People have reached out to us and said, well, if he's such a good blitzer, why don't they just try him as an edge rusher because they're struggling to rush the passer from the edges? And I
Those are
kept,
two different things.
thank you. I was saying like edge rushers have a plan. They have hand usage, speed to power. They're used to going up against
They have
offensive
to
tackles,
they have
right?
to beat somebody.
Yes.
Very often when he was with the Bucks in those couple of years when he was very, very good, they structured their fronts, they structured their pressures in such a way that he got past the first level clean. And
Mm-hmm.
then if he was picked up, he would be picked up by a back, which is a lot different than battling a 320-pound offensive tackle.
Right.
And there were times he even got in totally clean based on the structure of the pressure concept. So those are not even comparable things to discuss.
Agreed. All right. So we will go into Brown's injuries right now. And Greg, the list is long.
The list is
Uh,
long, yes,
the,
indeed.
yeah. So it starts for them. Obviously, they're waiting to see when they can get Nick Chubb back. He was activated into their 21-day window 2 weeks ago, but he has been a limited participant in practice up until this game. So he is not expected to play. He's coming back from that gruesome ACL injury
Yeah.
that he had. And then, of course, a big part of their offense, David Njoku, who has already missed time from a high ankle sprain, is not going to play now because of a knee injury. He's a good. I don't think David gets enough. Everybody talks about the Kelseys of the world and maybe the Trey McBrides and George Kittles, but David Njoku is a pretty good tight end. No.
Yes, and he's a very athletic tight end.
Yeah.
He can beat you at all three levels. So he can run the seam. He can beat you at the intermediate and deeper levels as well. So yes, he's a very good receiving tight end, and you can line him up anywhere in the formation.
Right. Is he a good blocker?
I think he's good enough. I wouldn't say that's his strength, but he's good enough.
Okay. I only ask because obviously they've been banged up front. The good news is potentially that their right tackle, Jack Conklin, who has missed all 5 games so far because of knee and hamstring injuries, is expected to play as of now. If he can't go for whatever reason, they'll go back to DeJuan Jones. But it looks like Jack
Struggled, by the
Conklin.
way. DeJuan Jones has struggled.
Right. And they're used to getting pretty good offensive tackle play out of Conklin and also out of left tackle Jedrick Willis, but he's coming off knee surgery and he's been in and out of the lineup at left tackle. So that's obviously when you look at one of the reasons why maybe Deshaun Watson hasn't been comfortable. He hasn't had his two mainstay offensive tackles. And also, Greg, right guard Wyatt Teller is on IR and rookie Zach Zinter has been starting in place of him. And then you add to that their center Ethan Pochik. This is a new injury for them. He has a knee injury that's going to force him out, and Nick Harris will be starting at center. So, depending on what happens here, you can have 4/5 of your line either not completely healthy or on backups, and that's rough.
And I think Wyatt Teller is critical here because that impacts your ability to play call and the options in the run game. Because Wyatt Teller is one of the two or three best pulling guards in the league in the gap scheme run game, and that is not what Zach Zinter does. So Zach Zinter is a third-round pick out of Michigan, very good college player, one of those kind of strong mauler types, competitive, aggressive, but not a puller.
Mm-hmm.
So it limits what they can do in the run game because Teller was he's fantastic as a puller. I mean, that's his game. And they had really, because of Teller, and Bitonio can pull as well, but Teller in particular, they had sort of transitioned a bit over the last couple of years from being a heavy zone running team, because that was what Kevin Stefanski did, to
Right.
really incorporating far more gap scheme, which is when a guard pulls. And Wyatt Teller is one of the best in the league at that. So this does limit what they can do in the run game to some extent. Maybe one reason why they have not run the ball particularly well, even without Nick Chubb, obviously a great back, but they've
Mm-hmm.
not run the ball particularly well.
There you go. On defense, Greg, Maurice Hurst, the defensive tackle, is questionable. He was a full participant in Friday's practice. I believe he was in the 21-day practice window. So we will see. Usually when you're questionable, you got a shot to play. So he would give them. Is he a starter or is that more of a depth piece for them up front?
He's a rotational player, but a really solid one.
Right.
Yeah.
Miles Garrett reigning defensive player of the year, I believe, he's been playing, but he's dealing with a foot, a thigh, and an Achilles injury. That is like the partridge in a pear tree right there
Geez,
for
yeah, that's a
lower
lot going
body
on.
injuries. I was going to ask you, when you've watched their defense, and what can you tell on tape that he doesn't maybe have the explosion or get off that
That's hard to say. I mean, yeah, I really can't, so I'm not going to make it up.
okay.
But I don't think I will say this. You and I both know that there's no way that they're going into this game, the Eagles, that is, saying, don't worry about Myles Garrett. He may not be 100%. There's no way that that's happening.
Absolutely. I'm sure they've got the red penny on somebody in practice who's being him.
Yeah.
Also on defense, Jordan Hicks has been out with elbow and triceps injuries. He's been limited at practice. He's listed as questionable. If he doesn't play, I believe his spot has been
Devin
taken
Bush.
up by Devin Bush. Is that to you a big drop off from
Yes.
Jordan Hicks? Oh, okay.
I think that's a meaningful drop off.
Hmm.
Um, Bush has been with 3 or 4 teams. He was a top 10 pick when he came out of Michigan. Very athletic kid, never quite saw it and reacted the right way. Whereas Jordan Hicks, obviously, he played for Philadelphia, a
Yep.
veteran player, really smart, can move around, sees things, triggers quickly. Bush is not that kind of player. That's a meaningful downgrade.
All right. Well, if he's able to play, then if he and Hurst can play, that would seemingly give the Browns some pretty better juice up front and make up for what they might be missing on the back end. So it starts with Denzel Ward, their very good corner. He was questionable because he's limited. He was limited Friday in practice. They think he's going to be able to play, but with corners, hamstrings, things like that. I mean, they could start the game and come out 2 or 3 plays later. So we'll just have to see what Denzel Ward can give them. And Grant Delpit, their safety, he suffered a concussion. He's out. Ronnie Hickman, another defensive back they have, has
Yeah.
an ankle injury. He's out. So it looks like at safety, you're going to see Rodney McLeod and DeAnthony Bell. And I should remind everybody that Juan Thornhill is also on injured reserve. So this is a pretty banged up secondary.
Yeah, and I think the Delpit loss is really, really big.
Yeah.
He is a really, really good football player and so critical to how they play defense because they are a predominant, high percentage, single high safety defense. Okay, they don't play a lot of split safety, too high structure. They don't do a lot of that. They are a single high safety defense. So Delpit is really the box player, the overhang player, the blitzer. Delpit is a multi-dimensional safety who's really, really good around the line of scrimmage. And they don't have another safety like that. So again, does that limit Jim Schwartz's play calling and game planning? I would think it does, but obviously we're not Jim Schwartz. But they don't have another player who's even remotely like Grant Delpit.
Right, right. We detailed a sack that he split with, I think, Dalvin Tomlinson in
Yep,
their
where
last
he gets
game,
off the
where
edge.
he
Yep.
came flying off the edge. And I said it reminded me of a Brian Dawkins like slack because he was horizontal as he was flying at that. He just came firing through the edge there. So, yeah, that's a tenacious player that Jim Schwartz will have to overcome the loss of. So, why don't we talk about that? We'll get into the Browns off. We'll start off with the Browns offense first, because obviously the Deshaun Watson situation is a big storyline. And you couple that with the fact that the Eagles went into the bye week with major, major questions about their defense, their ability to stop the run and tackle,
Yep.
and also their ability to generate pass rush. We surmised and we talked about this, that perhaps they come out of the bye week realizing that they have to play their corners up on receivers a little more and help the pass rush out a little bit, not make it easy, free ride for the quarterback. We don't know if that's going to be the case, but Greg, if they're going to do it, I mean, obviously, if Deshaun Watson can play a little better, and we'll get into him, the Browns have some pretty good weapons here. You can't give free rides to guys, right? Like Amari
No.
Cooper and Jerry Jeudy.
No, and this is the dilemma for coaches. And I want people to understand it's not an easy thing. I know fans think, oh, well, this isn't working, do this. But it's a dilemma because what do you do, Geoff? Do you say, based on tape, they're studying tape far more detail than I am. So, they know more about their team and their players than I do. Believe me.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem saying that because it's true. But here's the dilemma. The dilemma is, do we keep doing what we're doing and just try to get better at doing it? Because look, Vic Fangio has been doing this a long time, Geoff, and he's good at it. So that's one part of the equation. The other is, hey, do we need to make some, not significant because you don't change everything, during the middle of a season, but do we need to make some meaningful adjustments based on what we thought our personnel could do, but maybe they can't do it the way we thought. So that's the dilemma. Just keep doing the same thing and maybe we coach it better and play it better, or do we really need to make some significant adjustments in how we go about doing that? And that's not an easy answer. And I think fans need to understand that that is not an easy answer. Fans might think it is. They look, oh, the Eagles are 2-2, their defense isn't any good. You got to do something different.
Right.
Well, if you're going to do something different, you got to practice it. And, there's not a ton of practice time.
Correct. And Vic Fangio has made a note of that. And the Eagles practice about 3 times longer each practice this year and then in the past. And Vic still was
Right.
not really thrilled with how much time.
Right. So,
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, Greg, and we can maybe just mull it over from a Vic Fangio standpoint. Um, the concept of trust in your personnel, because when I think of Vic Fangio's best defenses, right, going
yeah.
back to San Francisco, I mean, those were physical defenses. Justin
Yes.
Smith was a very tenacious player. Alden Smith off the edge was fast, but even in the back end, you had Dante Whitner, who wanted to rename himself Dante Hittner. I mean, he was one of the hardest hitting safeties in the league.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Chicago, you talk about Akeem Hicks, you talk about Khalil Mack, Eddie Jackson at safety. And even last year on the Dolphins, they were beat up, but he had some what I would call physical players, whether you want to call Chubb or even as a cornerback. Jalen Ramsey's a big guy.
Yeah.
I just wonder if right from the start with this Eagles defense, the way they've been built, if he just doesn't trust the physicality, and they've almost illustrated that with the way they've
It's
played.
possible. And the other thing too is, and you just made a great point, and it made me think as you were speaking that they also don't have, in my mind, what you'd call a tempo setter on defense. That one guy that sort of brings the swagger.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be your best player,
Right.
but they don't really have. Again, we're not in the locker room, so maybe there is a guy that is like that in the locker room. But watching the tape, you don't see a guy, and sometimes, like I said, it's not necessarily your best player. Like I wouldn't say that Myles Garrett is that guy for the Browns, even though he's obviously, probably one of the 5 best defensive players in the league. But
Right.
I don't think he's that guy. Like I would say Delpit's more that guy for the Browns than Garrett is.
Yeah, you're talking about an igniter, a fire
Yeah,
starter.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yes. The
absolutely.
defense is like that. Obviously, defense is all about doing things right, playing with your eyes, playing with the right technique. That's true in any sport, doing all the right things. But in the NFL, playing defense is also about just being aggressive, tenacious, and look, it's a manhood sport. That's just the
Hmm.
reality of life.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We're not in the locker room, but my sense is watching the tape. I don't know how you feel. I don't think that there doesn't seem to me one guy that stands out as that guy.
No, back a couple of years ago, we could talk about Maddox at least being able to come up and hit you. He was a pretty good nickel corner who could play the run, but he's been so banged up. Certainly, C.J. Gardner Johnson, even the year they went to the Super Bowl, was a more valuable turnover piece than
Right.
tackling guy. In fact, the hit, I still marvel at the hit he made on what, 3rd and 1 in New Orleans, where he came
Oh,
down and
yes, 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 yes.
yeah, that
And
was the most
he may
anti
be
CJ Gardner play ever.
he may be the closest to that guy because he is a swagger guy.
Right.
Um, but you'd love it for somebody. It doesn't have to be, but you'd love it for somebody in your front seven. But
Hmm.
it just doesn't seem like, don't forget, Dean and Bond are brand new starters. They're probably, Bond's playing a new position. And even though I think he's played well this year, one of the better defenders, I think you'd probably agree, he's still playing a new position. And,
Yes.
there's still growing pains. And
Right.
Dean is a first time real starter because of injuries. So he's still learning too.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think they're missing that piece. You're right. And maybe it was Van Ginkel last year, somebody who could play inside linebacker, outside linebacker, give you some juice,
Right.
be that guy who, like you just said, sets the tone the way Dante Whitner would also do. I mean, they had Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis. I mean, he was blessed with great
Oh, yeah.
physical, tenacious linebackers, and he had some pretty good ones with the Bears as well. I'm trying to think about his Broncos defense. I mean, I think he had Browning, but Browning was young at
Yeah,
that
he was a
time.
rookie, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but he's always had those kind of players. So I wonder. again, about trust and if he believes he has what he needs to carry out what he wants to do. And
And he
we'll
may
see.
not. Yeah, and if he doesn't feel that way, then they're trying to work toward that, and that takes a little bit of time, and then you kind of don't know what you're going to get necessarily week to week.
Right. So the change to look for in this game potentially, as Vic Fangio even said, would be playing Cooper DeJean, the rookie second rounder, at nickel where he's been practicing, and Vic Fangio said he's closing in on the job. To me, when a guy says that publicly, it means he's going to get the job,
I would agree.
and
And
it's
by the
probably going
way,
to be sooner than later.
he might be that guy. Now, I don't think he can be that guy from day one,
Hmm.
but he might be that kind of guy because
Right.
I think there's a quiet toughness and competitiveness about Cooper DeJean, just in the way he plays the game. Now,
Hmm.
like I said, I don't know if that happens week one or week two of him as a starter, but he could develop into that guy.
What was his tape like at Iowa against run, playing the nickel, maybe blitzing a little bit today? I know
Well,
Iowa's
he
a
played
big
outside
boneheaded.
a lot in college.
Right.
And, many people, including myself, did not think he would transition to the NFL as an outside corner.
Hmm.
I thought he'd be in a slot, maybe even become a safety, which I know the Eagles believe that that may be his ultimate position down the road. But I did not see him as an outside corner. And I had conversations with people who felt the same way. But there's a toughness to him, there's a savvy to him, there's an awareness to him. He's a good straight line athlete. He can run. Um, so, he was a good prospect. Just, look, if everybody saw him as an outside corner, he would have been a first round pick, and he wasn't.
Right, of course. All right, so we'll see if that change and maybe a little bit of a different coverage can help out the rest of the defense. But obviously, they'll have to tackle better, and obviously, they will have to get to the quarterback more than they have. Now, I joked with you before we started the show when I was researching Deshaun Watson's sack total. My eyes almost fell out of my head. He's been sacked 26 times
Yeah.
already. He's already had 3 games, Greg, and they've only played 5, where he's been sacked 6 or more times, including 7 last week against Washington. So let's talk about Deshaun here, because you detailed it for our Patreon members and also on Inside the Tape that there are times where the plays are there, the throws just aren't going there, and he's taking sacks when guys are wide open. When you start to see that out of a guy, you start to wonder what's going on upstairs because the opens are there, the openings are there.
Yeah, I think there's a number of issues with Deshaun right now. And by the way, you know, one of the issues, of course, is that he moves prematurely when he does not need to. And offensive linemen hate that. And so he creates many of his own sacks for that reason. And
Hmm.
the term I used is he's a pressure perceiver. And what I mean by that is he gets a glimpse of opposing jersey color and he breaks down in the pocket. Um, and the problem with that is, and any quarterback will tell you, is that you can never see pressure. You have to feel pressure. My sense is he sees pressure, and that is as bad a trait as any NFL quarterback can have.
Hmm.
So he breaks down in the pocket prematurely, which means he is responsible for disrupting the timing of the passing game. That's
Right.
one thing. The other fact is even when he doesn't do that, I think there's a predetermination to where he wants to go with the ball. And that's also a problem because, if that's not there and you're still going to throw it, then you're going to run into some problems as well.
Hmm.
So I think that he has a number of issues. And, it's funny you mentioned all the sacks. Offensive linemen, boy, do they hate when a quarterback moves and he doesn't have to. I mean, that is just the worst for an offensive lineman.
Right. Absolutely. Um, I wonder. So I wanted to ask you if you go back to his Texans career where he was so successful, was there anything schematically different that made it easier for him, or does he just look like someone who has regressed because he's missed a lot of time? He had the year, he took his own year off, then he had
Right.
missed time. I mean, he did miss a significant amount of time, and then on top of that, he's had injuries.
Yeah. I can't remember in detail his Texans tape, but I would say that now he's moving more than I can ever remember. That's what I
Mm.
remember. Again, I haven't studied his Houston tape obviously recently. He's always been a quarterback that moves, and I think quarterbacks that move, Jeff, they always walk a fine line. I mean, you could even, it's funny, I was watching this week, I was watching Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, I watch him every single week. And you would probably not teach someone to play exactly the way he does
Right.
because he moves a lot when he doesn't need to. He just has an incredibly special feel for doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
you probably are not telling him don't do that. But, he's just one of those guys. That's what makes Patrick Mahomes who he is and a special, special player.
Mm-hmm.
But, you don't teach guys to play the quarterback position like that. And a lot of guys, Josh Allen's like this as well. And I think most would say he's a top three quarterback in the league. But they walk a fine line between playing from the pocket with a sense of precision and timing and moving. So sometimes they cross that line and they move too much and unnecessarily. We've seen a little of that recently too for people that watch the games with Brock Purdy. He's starting to move around a little too much, you know. So Deshaun Watson is definitely in that group now where he moves unnecessarily, and that causes problems for your offense.
Sure. Absolutely. They are an 11 personnel heavy team, Greg. They're going to play
Yep,
three wide receivers a lot. It's going to be Amari Cooper. It's going to be Jerry Judy. Is Judy lining up as a Z, move Z, a slot? Where is he usually in
he
their
moves
formation?
around. He's
Okay.
probably better inside, but he moves around.
Right. And their third receiver has been generally who this year?
Well, they played both Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman. I really liked Cedric Tillman when he came out of Tennessee. It seems like Moore is getting more snaps recently, so I can't speak as to the why of that. But Tillman is a big physical receiver who's got good speed, good movement. I don't know why, like I said, but I really like Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, well, that has been an issue this year at times for the Eagles. That number three receiver, we saw Ray McLeod make some pretty big catches against the Eagles in that game, and then of course in the Tampa Bay game, Trey Palmer, right? He made a few catches, including I
A
think he had a
touchdown.
touchdown, right? He had a
Yeah.
nice touchdown. That's the
When he
second
was when he
game.
was lined up at boundary X.
Right, right. So the Eagles, if their problems on defense continue, that would be someone who maybe you ordinarily don't worry about that you should because of just the way the Eagles have defended this year. Let's finish off this defense versus the Browns offense with this. The linebackers are going to be Nakobe Dean and they're going to be
Yeah.
Zach Vaughn. Interestingly, Vic Fangio said the next man up, or maybe it was Nick Sirianni, said the next man up would be Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and not Oren Burks. We kind of thought when they signed Oren Burks as the sixth linebacker, it's because he was a veteran, because he's a big physical guy and he could help stabilize if need be, but it would actually be Trotter Jr., as they say right now. We'll have to see what kind of leash is on that. But has Vic Fangio in other spots rotated linebackers much, or is he normally like his kind of two guys?
No, he normally plays the same two, but it doesn't surprise me for a second that it
Mhm.
would be Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I loved his tape coming out. He had a linebacker in Denver named Josie Jewell, who I'm sure you remember. He went to Iowa,
Yep.
played Penn State a number of times. He played Penn State when they had Barkley. And I could see in my mind's eye anyway some similarities between the two.
Hmm.
You wouldn't say either one is the best athlete for the position, but they both know how to play linebacker. They
Right.
both see things really quickly. They play with a quick trigger. They understand where to be. They have good eye discipline. As I think I've said a number of times, I liked Jeremiah Trotter's tape coming out of college more than I liked Nakobe Dean's tape coming out of college. It
Hmm.
would not surprise me. Again, we don't know we don't know what's going to happen Sunday or 2 weeks from now, but it would not surprise me if Jeremiah Trotter would at some point this year beat out Nakobe Dean. That would not surprise me.
All right. Well, we'll see. And maybe they're just trying to make him next man up because he did have a good camp. We thought he might even have a chance to get in there situationally, depending on what they were going to do. But you're right, Vic has mostly played his two guys, but we'll see if there's an injury or any more instability if they decide to make a move there. All right, let's switch over now and we'll talk about this Eagles offense, Greg, against a Browns defense. The biggest thing, the storyline is obviously full strength. You have AJ Brown back, you
Yes.
have Devontae Smith back. Now, listen, they were pretty healthy at the end of last year when they were losing games too, and they did have the turnover issues against Green Bay when they were fully healthy. So it doesn't just automatically make you get right. But man, for Jalen Hurts, and you've watched the tape and you see how he has a trust and a reliance on AJ Brown. And I've always said, not only that, but AJ Brown just gives you a physical presence where he can make something more out of something little. That's such a huge difference for this team.
Yeah, well, the thing about this matchup that's interesting to me, and by the way, because they do have a good old line, this strikes me as a game, believe it or not, and we've talked a lot about Jalen Hurts' issues this season, that some have carried over from last year. But I think that with the injuries on the Browns defense, I think you got to throw the football. Now, again, I don't want people to think that means you're throwing it 60 times, but Denzel Ward, we'll see.
Yeah, test them
What is
out.
the We'll see what his effectiveness is. Yeah, Delpit's gone. I mean, they're going to play Rodney McLeod and DeAnthony Bell at safety. You've got to make those guys play.
Hmm.
Okay. Now Emerson and Newsome are healthy, so Emerson will play on the outside. He always does. We'll see where Newsome ends up playing because if Ward ends up missing snaps, very often they put Newsome on the outside, and then
Hmm.
your slot corner becomes, I think it would become Cameron Mitchell. So there's ways to attack this defense throwing the football. And by the way, Jordan Hicks, another guy. I mean, if Devin Bush is in there, one thing about Devin Bush is he's always struggled in the pass game.
Hmm.
He just doesn't have a feel for it. So protection is obviously number one because Myles Garrett is a terrific pass rusher, arguably the best in the league on the outside, but they move him around. They move Zadarius Smith around. But I think we all believe, and it's true, that the Eagles have a really, really good O-line. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, so, we'll see what happens there. But
Yeah.
I think that this is a game that does set up to attack on the perimeter against the Browns defense.
Sure. And especially the Browns and the way they structure their defense. Jim Schwartz always known for playing a lot of cover one, cover three on the outside.
Oh,
Gives you
great
so
point. So those outside receivers, if you work outside the numbers, the post safety is a non-factor.
right.
He's
Right.
not going to get there. And by the way, you know, you still have a professional quarterback, okay? Yes, Jalen Hurts has had some concerns, but you can't go into a game with the idea that, oh my God, we can't do anything because of our quarterback. And by the way, it's not like he can't play. He's just
Right.
had some concerns that we've documented, but he's also played at a high level in this league. So you have to go into this game and look at the opposing defense and say, hey, here's the way we can attack this defense. And
Right.
you have to then go at it that way.
It's funny to see sometimes the reactions of to things that we say, whether it's in a podcast or even like a cut up that I might put up. You have been mentioning at times Jalen Hurts struggling to see some of the plays that are there or leaving the pocket early. And then you also gave a different but similar breakdown of what's bogging Deshaun Watson, and some people responded, "Oh man, it sounds like you're talking a lot about Jalen Hurts too with this Deshaun Watson." It's like, whoa, 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 no, 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 no. One guy is really struggling to an egregious point. The other guy is still making plays. It's just that there are
Right.
the plays he's leaving on the field that are hurting him in moments. These are not apples to apples comparisons here on how
No,
struggling who.
no, and I think that having Brown back and and even Smith and the ability to work outside the numbers will be critical here. You
Yeah.
know, that's where AJ Brown, he's very good, obviously running inside as well. We've seen that. Um, I think you'll see the RPO game. I think you'll see them try to, have one read, no read type throws to get the ball to AJ Brown quickly. Let him try to run after catch. We'll see what they do with Goddard, who obviously, with those receivers out, put up some big numbers. I hope they don't now forget about him because I think he can. As we said, they're playing with backup safeties. McLeod's a veteran, obviously, but he's not truly a starting safety in the league anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Bell is their fourth safety.
Yes, right. So let's talk about also what Jim Schwartz is doing, because I think for most Eagles fans who are watching this show who remember the Jim Schwartz tenure here, they would be shocked, as I was, to find out that the Browns blitz at the third highest rate so far through 5 weeks in the
Well,
NFL.
there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you in a sec. Keep
We're
going
going to
though.
get to that. They are blitzing at a 35.3% rate. Right now, Jim Schwartz is in Brian Flores and Vance Joseph territory, and that is not company that he is accustomed to keeping. But you're saying there's a reason for that. Please,
Well, I
please
think
tell
he's
us
playing
what.
to his personnel because
Yeah.
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is an explosive athlete, a linebacker, and a truly explosive downhill player. So you want to get him involved in the blitz game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that that's one reason why you're seeing, he's not the only reason. I'm sure Jim Schwartz has, evolved a little bit, seeing, look, you may know this, but blitzing is up across the league and quarterbacks are having trouble with blitzes.
Yes.
And it's not just quarterbacks, obviously, it's entire offenses, but obviously quarterbacks, that's how we evaluate. We look at quarterbacks versus blitz, and
Right.
that's what we do. But,
Yeah.
but, blitzing is up, quarterback production versus blitz is way down. and he's got Jeremiah Usukoromoa, who is a dynamic, explosive mover.
Right. Yeah, it's
And
funny.
actually,
Everybody,
Delpit's out, but he's a really good blitzer too.
yep. Yep. It's funny, you got guys like Jim Schwartz all of a sudden blitzing and Wink Martindale's out in Michigan going, what happened? I was doing all this and nobody wanted me. I had to go to Michigan to get
Right,
a
right,
defensive
right.
coordinator job. They're all
Yeah.
doing what I was doing. But no, that's what impressed me watching some Browns tape is that it's not that Jim is just throwing an extra rusher in there. I mean, he's doing some overloads, he's twisting a little bit. I mean, he's showing some droppers and trying to get free rushers. I mean, he really is he was known here, maybe unfairly, maybe not, whatever, as a sort of a conservative, vanilla style of defensive game planner who's just relying on the front four to get to the quarterback or divert the running back on the way to the quarterback. And that really was his core philosophy. And you can argue the personnel changed a lot, but he always stuck to that philosophy. Now he has adapted.
Yes, and they have a number of players in their defensive front that can line up anywhere, and they
Mm-hmm.
move them around. We mentioned Garrett, Darius Smith. Did I Okaranko? He wasn't on the injury report, was he? I don't remember seeing his name.
Okaranko was a full participant in practice all week. He just had an illness, so he was okay. He's okay.
Okay, so he's another guy. He's a really good pass rusher. They move him around quite a bit as well. So they have three guys that can line up basically anywhere, Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
and they do a lot of different things with him. So he's become, I think, a little more versatile in his schematic approach because of the kinds of players that he has.
Sure. It's funny that you say, because I agree with you. My first thought was going through the injury report and seeing how they were doing. I was saying to myself, I mean, I think the opening is there to really throw the ball. But Greg,
I
if you
agree.
remember, it's just a week ago that we're doing sort of the self scout of the Eagles. What's wrong with them at 2-2? And we're all in agreement that maybe they should just stabilize, get back to running the ball, feel things out until the quarterback's comfortable. But then you see a matchup like this and you think, I
And
got
again,
really good weapons.
they may do just what you said, by the way, and that wouldn't be wrong. But as I said, you can't go into look. Jalen Hurts has been in a Super Bowl. He's had success in this league. You
Mhm.
don't go into a game with the idea that let's hide our quarterback.
Right.
You have to look at the defense you're playing against and say, hey, here's the way, based on film study, we believe we can attack them. And then the playbook's wide open as
Mhm.
far as that goes. That's the way you have to look at it.
Right. Now, this will be a really interesting look, Greg, for the Eagles offense as to where Jahan Dotson fits because, when they acquired him, a lot of people felt, oh, well, he'd be a slot receiver. He didn't really play a ton of slot in Washington. In the first game where all three receivers were healthy, he just didn't play a whole lot because he was new to the team. But
Right.
now he's been with the team for more than a month. But AJ Brown comes back, Devontae Smith comes back. I'm really fascinated to see, especially against a team that's going to play as much one safety deep where the seams will be open. We know Dallas Goedert has had big games against those style of defenses, but I'm really curious to see where the slot receiver matchups are and who the personnel is and what they can get out of Jahan Dotson, if anything.
Being honest, Jeff, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's an unknown, don't you,
I,
right
I
now?
absolutely do.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I tell you what, we talked about this last week that the first play of the game in their last game, they went pony package with two backs and had Shipley and Barkley on the field. I personally, again, they know more about their players than I do. I would love to see more of that because
Mm-hmm.
I think both of those players can line up anywhere in the formation. You'll find out how the Browns want to react to that. Do they want to play nickel? Do they want to play base? That will give you some clues as to what kind of plays and formations you can use. I would like to see more of that, even if it's Gainwell.
Mm-hmm.
The point is being the pony package. Because right now, I'm not sure about production from a number three receiver.
Right. We've talked about throwing to the running back. I'm wondering if you've seen anything, if you remember anything on tape from Saquon Barkley's time with the Giants about being used as sort of a seam stretcher, like the H seam route that running backs will run occasionally. Because the Eagles under Doug Peterson got a few of those big plays out of Miles Sanders, who was
Yeah,
not a route running back at Penn State, but had good enough hands to be able to do
right.
that. And I'm wondering if Saquon Barkley has those abilities, if there's any tape that shows that he can
Well,
run that.
I can't recall a specific play of that, but there's no question he can do that
Mm-hmm.
because we've seen him line up outside and run vertical type routes.
Correct.
So there's no question he can do it.
Right.
And obviously if you're playing single high, um, I mean, I learned a long time ago from an old coach who since passed away named Rod Rust, who coached in the NFL for years and years and years. And one of the first things he told me, because he's considered the pioneer of quarters coverage, but he said one of the first things any offense should do in any given week is attack the seams and find out how a defense is going to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, then you'll find out how they're going to play it, and then you can respond accordingly. So, I mean, I always think, and maybe this is old school, but I always think that, you've got to try to control the middle of the field and see how a defense handles that. And then if you find out how they handle it, then the outside is there,
Right.
So we'll see what the Eagles do. I mean, obviously Dallas Goedert is hugely talented,
Mm-hmm.
and in the absence of Smith and Brown, he's put up some big numbers. But just because they're back now, and we know how much Jalen likes throwing to AJ Brown, you
Mm-hmm.
can't leave Goddard out of the equation.
All right. You want to balance your offense, give a little guesswork to the defense. Speaking of guesswork, I'm going to close it out on the offense on this. I feel like the Eagles have, and we saw this coming a little bit. We talked about it going into the year with their new offensive line, new center, new right guard. They have allowed some free rushers to the quarterback. Now, that's going to happen when you face guys like Todd Bowles, Raheem Morris, right? I get that. But I
Right.
feel like I'm sure they look back on the first 4 weeks and say that process part has got to be cleaned up a little bit more. We know Jalen Hurts is now in charge a little bit more, has autonomy on setting protections, but Jurgens is getting his feet wet here as a center. New right guard, Becton, who did not play guard. Do you have sort of concerns about how that might look against what Jim Schwartz has been doing with his fronts?
Well, let's put it this way: it's going to be tested and challenged.
Yes.
So we'll see how it plays out, but that will be challenged for sure. Um, and it would not surprise me to see them put either Myles Garrett or Zadarius Smith over Cam Jurgens at times. Not
Mm-hmm.
maybe not with their hand in the ground, but kind of in that joker position, a couple yards off the ball, but over Jurgens.
Right.
Um, we've seen the Cowboys do that with Micah Parsons, and they basically get a running start to attack the center. I think they might do that just to see about Jurgens and his ability to protect in that kind of situation. Plus, that makes it a five-man front. Very often, you get one-on-ones. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, they're going to test them, and we'll see. I mean, certainly we know that the O line is an Eagles' strength for the most part. So you hope they hold up, but they'll be tested.
Yeah. The Browns are sixth in the NFL in sacks per pass attempt. So they're doing pretty well at hitting quarterbacks. Situationally, 12th and third down, 18th red zone. I do think, and uh, you can tell me if you agree or disagree. I think the symbiotic relationship between a functional offense and a functional defense here has hurt the Browns defense. Right? I mean, I'm sure they're on the field more
Without
than they
question,
expect. And the flipping of the field from the turnovers has put them in a bind.
you're 100% right. Yeah, that's exactly right. This
Uh,
offense has their issues are on the offensive side of the ball.
yeah. Yeah. It's really, if they have injuries, if they have issues, it's because of injuries here on the defensive side.
Right, right.
All right, so let's do what we always do, Greg. We predict the game, we predict the outcome, the score, and the MVP of the game. So, how do you see this game unfolding?
Boy, just because I've watched the Browns, going back to last year and every game this year, and I just think offensively, now, is it possible Deshaun Watson can make a special play or two? Sure, it is. But that just hasn't happened. He's an uncomfortable player. The offense has had no rhythm or timing to it. They haven't run the ball particularly well. Again, all we have is what's happened.
Yep.
None of us can predict the future. I just I'd be hard pressed to see the Eagles losing this game, Geoff. I really would. I mean,
Wow.
look, I don't think the Eagles right now are playing well enough where I'm thinking it's going to be 35-10, although turnovers could make it that way. So I'm going to go in the 27-13 range here for the Eagles.
27-13. That seems safe. That seems right. I agree with you. Turnovers and both teams have been plagued with them. So that always makes it tough to predict these games, by the way, because you never know when these
You
turnovers
never know.
and never know
Yeah.
how they're going to come
And I
either.
think the way Watson is playing, he can be turnover prone now. But
Hmm.
like I said, he can also make some plays. So, you don't know. Now, as far as an MVP, that's my next, that's next, right?
Yep.
I'm going to go AJ Brown because I think with
Um,
him back, I think you're going to see a pretty large target share.
Yeah, I would think so too. And I forgot to mention that the Eagles are 8.5 point favorites. So you do have a cover. You got to cover there, and AJ Brown is the game MVP. I'm just like you. I think we're in the same neighborhood. I wrestled with it a little bit because, you know, I know some people are gonna be like, "Oh, you're Negadelphia." I'm not. I think the Browns have an opportunity to get right, and if they do make that quarterback change, man, we saw what Flacco did. All it takes is a quarter or a half to just get
Right,
everything
right.
right. So I don't
And
know,
then,
but
boy, and you'd have to believe, before I'm sorry to interrupt, but you'd
yeah, go
have to
ahead.
believe if it's halftime and it's 17-3 Eagles, you'd have to believe you're going to see Jameis Winston.
Yeah, in fact, I was shocked it didn't happen last week. I know that he
Yeah,
comes in short yardage situations. I guess he came in a few
yeah,
times,
yeah.
but yeah, if you're already putting him on the field a little bit, you got it in your mind. But I have the Eagles winning by 10, 26-16. I also have AJ Brown as my MVP. I swear I picked that before you said it. I think it
It
just
just
makes
seems to me
sense.
to make the most sense because I think you're looking for comfort now. You're looking to try to get everybody on offense comfortable, and we know the comfort level there. And we also, I mean, look, they're going to try to run the ball. They're not going to give up on Barkley, obviously,
Right.
but I think they're going to feel like they can make plays, particularly against a secondary that could well be hurting here.
Yeah. Yep. We will see. And now we just leave it to the teams to play it out, Greg, and either make fools or geniuses of us both. That's the best part. All right. That is going to do it for the Inside the Birds pregame show for Greg Cosell. I'm Geoff Mosher. Enjoy your football watching.